6 days ago, alone in the night, she had given birth. Louisiana, November 1945. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell walked the rows at the women's compound at Camp Ruston, her medical kit heavy at her hip as she checked each prisoner for signs of sickness before the coming winter. The war had ended 6 months earlier, yet thousands of German women still waited to go home, living in old Army barracks under American control. Sarah had examined many that morning, tired women, thin women, women marked by the clear scars of war. But when she reached Barrack 7 and asked 23-year-old Annalise Becker to undress for the routine exam, Sarah's hand stopped. The woman's body told a truth she had not spoken. New stretch marks crossed her belly like pale rivers, and her breast showed signs of recent milk. When Sarah pressed lightly on her lower stomach, Annalise's sharp breath confirmed what the nurse already feared. This woman had had a baby, and very recently. Sarah's thoughts raced. The exam room was cold, November wind leaking through cracks in the wooden walls. Annalise stood before her in a thin, issued dress, shaking, though whether from cold or fear Sarah could not tell. Around them, the camp moved with its usual noise. Guards walking, women talking nearby, the far metal clang from the kitchen as lunch was made. "Annalise," Sarah said softly in broken German, "when did you have your baby?" The young woman's eyes grew wide. For a long moment, she said nothing. Her jaw tightened, so hard Sarah could see the muscles move under her skin. Then, in slow English learned during months of captivity, Annalise whispered, 6 days ago." The words hung in the cold air like smoke. 6 days. Sarah's training counted the risks. Infection, bleeding, tissue not passed, afterbirth problems that could be deadly without care. And the baby? "Where is the child now?" Sarah asked. Her voice steady though fear rushed through her. Annalise's strength broke. Tears ran down her thin cheeks, and her hands moved to her belly as if the child still lay there, hidden and safe. "Please, you must not tell the officers. They will take her from me, send me back to Germany without her. I cannot lose another child." Another child. The words opened grief Sarah could only guess at. She guided Annalise to sit on the exam table and pulled up a wooden stool so she was at eye level with the frightened woman. "I need to examine you well," Sarah said, "to make sure you are healing. And I need to see the baby, but first tell me everything from the start." Annalise's story came slowly, in pieces, broken by silence and tears. She had been working in a munitions factory near Hamburg when British forces took it in April 1945. It had been long, exhausting, confusing months for everyone in the camp facing change and uncertainty. She is small and quiet. She knows she must stay silent to live. The workers, women, were held, then moved to American control, then taken across the Atlantic to prison camps in the U.S. By then, Annalise was 5 months pregnant. "My husband was lost in the East," she said, her English improving. "Our first child, a son, was 2 years old. He died in the bombing of Hamburg, the firestorm. I was at the factory. When I came back, there was nothing. No house, no street, no body to bury, only ash." Sarah felt the weight of such stories. Every prisoner she had checked carried the same loss, the same grief. The war had taken millions and left many empty and haunted. "When I learned I was pregnant again," Annalise went on, "I thought maybe God was giving me another chance, a new life to replace the one I had lost. But then we were caught, moved, sent here, and I was afraid. What would happen to a baby born in a prison camp? Would they take her from me? Put her away? Send her off? So you hid the pregnancy," Sarah said as the truth became clear. "I wore loose clothes, wrapped my belly when it began to show. The other women knew, some of them, but they said nothing. We protect each other here. It is all we have." Annalise's hands shook as she talked. "When the pains began 6 nights ago, I told no one. I went to the bathroom after lights out. The baby came fast, too fast. I made almost no sound." Sarah tried to picture it. Giving birth alone in a camp toilet, biting back cries, catching your baby in the dark, cutting a cord with what? She feared to ask. "I used a blade from my sewing kit," Annalise said, as if she had read Sarah's thoughts. "I cleaned it with alcohol I had saved from the medical stores. The cord was thick. It took many cuts, but I did it, and the bleeding stopped. The telling of these things stunned Sarah. The courage or fear needed to bring your child into the world in such a place, to care for a newborn in secret while seeming normal during roll calls and work, was beyond belief. "Where did you hide her in the day?" Sarah asked. "In a box under my bunk lined with blankets. The other women in my barracks help. They take turns watching her, feeding her with cloth dipped in water and milk we save from breakfast. At night, I hold her close against my chest under my blanket. She is tiny and quiet. She hardly cries." Sarah's medical training pulled against her human care. The child needed a real checkup, real food, real care. They will take her away and send us to different places. I cannot bear it. Annie Lee's fears were real, not imagined. The rules for prisoners and their children are strict, complex, and often harsh. In a camp, any baby born would be recorded, listed, and might be separated from the mother during the process of sending people home. "I need to see her," Sarah said with firm calm. "I understand your fear, Annalise, but the baby needs care, and you do as well. You have been very lucky that infection has not begun, but that can change fast." Fresh tears filled Annalise's eyes. "You will report us," she whispered. "I will examine you both, then we will talk about what comes next," Sarah said, standing and holding out her hand. "Please trust me." The walk back to Barack 7 felt endless. Sarah kept her face still, nodding to guards as they passed, keeping the look of normal medical rounds. Inside her head, choices and outcomes spun, rules and human needs pressing against each other. The barracks were empty when they entered. Most prisoners were away at work duty. Annalise led Sarah to a bunk in the far corner, dropped to her knees, and pulled out a wooden box that once held canned food. Inside, wrapped in many blankets, lay the smallest and most fragile baby Sarah had ever seen. The child was tiny, maybe 5 pounds, with dark hair and thin, clear skin that showed every small vein beneath. Her eyes were closed, her breaths shallow but steady. She wore a rough diaper made from torn cloth and a small gown sewn from an old pillowcase. Sarah knelt beside the box, her training taking over. She listened to the baby's heart, fast but strong. She checked the color, pale but not blue. She looked at the cord stump, surprisingly clean and healing well. The baby was far too small, likely early or slowed in growth from poor food during the pregnancy. Yet against all odds, she was still alive. "What is her name?" Sarah asked softly. "Marguerite, after my mother," Annalise said, her voice breaking. "She died in the war. Everyone is gone. Marguerite is all I have left of my family, of my life before." Sarah finished checking the baby and then examined Annalise with care. The young mother showed signs of anemia and hunger, but her body was healing as it should, with no sign of infection. The birth had been as clean as it could be in such a place, a small miracle. "You need iron tablets," Sarah said, "and more food." "I nurse her when I can," Annalise said. "The milk is little, not enough. She is always hungry." "I will arrange extra food," Sarah said. "On paper it will be for your recovery. No one needs to know the true reason." She paused before speaking again. "But Annalise, we must register Marguerite. We must make her official 6 days. She had given birth 6 days ago and told no one. Stay here. Care for Marguerite. I will return within 2 hours." Sarah said this, but her heart was racing. The choice was clear and painful, and it had to be faced now. Hiding the baby any longer would not work, and being found by chance or betrayal would be much worse than speaking up with care. Sarah had already explained the only path forward. If they did not register the child, if she stayed hidden, what would happen when Annalise was sent home? You cannot secretly carry a baby onto a transport ship. Someone would find her, and then everything would become harder. But if they created an identity now, if they wrote down that she was born here and must remain with her mother, there was a chance to keep them together. The logic was strong. But Sarah knew she might be making promises she could not keep. The military system was huge, slow, and often uncaring about human stories. Still, doing nothing was worse. She looked at the young woman whose courage had held so long under fear. Annalise had done everything she could to protect her child. Now she needed help. "Let me help you," Sarah said gently. The young woman's resistance weakened. She looked at her baby, still sleeping in the small makeshift crib, and Sarah could see the hard thinking in her eyes, weighing dangers and hope, trying to see which road gave her child the best chance to live. "What do you need me to do?" Annalise whispered. "Stay here. Care for Marguerite. I will return within 2 hours. If Captain Morrison agrees, we will need to move fast to record everything the right way." Sarah left the barracks with her medical kit and a sense of urgency. This situation was unlike anything she had faced before. She had treated wounded prisoners, delivered babies in hard places, handled medical crises with little supply. But a woman giving birth alone and hiding her newborn for nearly a week. This was beyond any book or rule she had ever read. Captain James Morrison's office sat in the camp's main building, once used by a lumber company. Sarah found him bent over papers, his desk covered with transport lists and return schedules. He looked up as she entered, seeing the strain on her face. "Nurse Mitchell, what can I do for you?" She closed the door, took a breath, and spoke. "Sir, I need to report an unusual situation, and I need your help to handle it." She told him everything. The exam, the hidden birth, the baby living against all odds, Annalise's fear and desperate actions. Morrison listened in silence, his face growing more serious. "Good Lord," he said when she finished. 6 days. She delivered 6 days ago and told no one. "Yes, sir. She is terrified of losing her child. And honestly, sir, under normal rules, her fears are justified. We must put the newborn's safety and the mother's safety first, without fear of being torn apart." Morrison leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "This is going to create a bureaucratic nightmare. An undocumented birth unreported for a week in a place under my command. The Red Cross will have questions. The State Department will have questions. Everyone will have questions. With respect, sir, the paperwork problems are secondary to the medical and human needs. That baby needs food and care. The mother needs care after birth, and both need calm, the promise they will not be forced apart. You are asking me to bend rules that exist for good reasons. Nurse, I am asking you to put the life and well-being of a newborn child and her mother ahead of convenience." Sarah kept her voice steady but firm. "Sir, I have worked in this camp for 8 months. I have seen how we treat these women with kindness, with respect for humanity despite being prisoners. This situation calls for the same response. We have a chance to do the right thing." Morrison was quiet for a moment, staring at the papers on his desk. Sarah saw the weight of command in his face, the knowledge that every choice had results, that care and rules often clashed, that the easy road was rarely the right one. "What exactly are you suggesting?" he asked. "We record the birth later. List the problems that kept it from being reported. Crisis, confusion, language gaps. We register Marguerite as a dependent of a prisoner. We note the need to keep her with her mother and make it part of the official record. That splitting them would be a health risk for both. That is not true. Other mothers and babies have been split. Other mothers did not give birth alone in a latrine and then hide and care for their newborn for a week. The mental shock Annalise has lived through losing her husband, her first child, her home, giving birth in captivity, is proven fact. Adding the pain of forced separation from her living child could have results. I can write a recommendation to that effect." Morrison studied her face, weighing her honesty and skill. "You would risk your standing on that judgment?" "Yes, sir. And if offices question how we handled this case, I will take responsibility. I will say I found the situation, made a call, and acted. You backed your officer's advice. That is proper chain of command." Another silence. Outside, the camp kept its rhythm. Guards changing shifts, prisoners moving to work, the machine of military holding moving. In this office, people tried to make space for care in a system built for order and control. "Right," Morrison said. "Here is what we will do then. You will examine mother and child again, this officially. Record everything, the birth, the health. Will you take my baby away from me?" That fear hung in the room like a weight. Sarah had seen it in Annalise's eyes from the first moment. The plan now was clear. She would make the medical notes, the full record, and the camp chaplain would stand as witness. All papers would be finished and sent through the proper offices, saying the case was unusual but under control, and that mother and child should stay together. She would write that forced separation could harm them. She would state that the mother's mind and body needed steady care with her infant close by. She could not promise what higher officers might decide, but she could promise this: they would do everything they could to argue for kindness. Relief washed through Sarah, warm and shaky. She thanked Captain Morrison. He warned her not to celebrate too soon. Trouble could still come. Yet he agreed that they must do what was best for the child. And sometimes rules had to bend so people did not break. The next hours rushed past. Sarah went back to Barracks 7 with Captain Morrison and Chaplain Williams, a gentle man who had served as a parish priest before the war. They found Annalise where Sarah had left her, sitting on the bunk, holding little Marguerite against her chest. Fear showed plainly on the young mother's face when two officers entered, but Sarah spoke quickly to calm her. "It's all right," she said. "Captain Morrison wants to help. We're going to make this official and keep you and your baby safe." The exam was careful and complete. Sarah spoke each note out loud while the chaplain wrote. The baby weighed 4 pounds 13 ounces. Her length was 17 inches. She was small, underfed, yet still steady. The cord stump showed normal healing. The mother's afterbirth condition was recorded. Captain Morrison asked gentle questions to set the timeline and facts. When did labor start? Around midnight 6 days earlier. The pains were strong and close. She went alone to the latrine, so no one would wake. The birth was fast, maybe 2 hours or less, and the baby came quickly once pushing. More questions followed, building a clear story that explained why the report was late and how hard the situation had been. Through all of it, Marguerite slept in her mother's arms, making small sounds but never crying, as if she knew silence still guarded her life. When the exam ended, Captain Morrison spoke to Annalise. "We will register your daughter. There will be forms and records, and some people in the offices may ask how this happened." Annalise held her baby tighter and asked the only question that mattered. "Will you separate us?" Sarah met her eyes and said, "No, not now. We will do everything we can to keep you together, but I cannot promise higher authorities will agree. Nurse Mitchell will provide all medical support, but final decisions may be beyond my control. What I can guarantee is that we will advocate for you both and ensure proper medical care. That is more than I could have hoped for." Annalise's voice was barely a whisper. "Thank you." The paperwork consumed most of the afternoon. Sarah wrote her medical report, highlighting the psychological stress and the health risks of separation. Captain Morrison drafted his command recommendation, noting the unusual circumstances while praising Annalise's resilience and the humane considerations involved. Chaplain Williams added a statement on the moral need to preserve the mother-child bond. By evening, the documents were finished and ready to go through military channels. Sarah returned to the women's compound with supplies: iron for Annalise, powdered formula for Marguerite, clean cloths for diapers, and a proper cradle requisitioned from camp stores. She also brought news that Annalise's food rations would be doubled, officially for medical recovery, but truly to support nursing. The women in Barracks 7 gathered as Sarah set the cradle beside Annalise's bunk. The secret had become official, and relief was visible on everyone's faces. "You should all know," Sarah said in her halting German. "Your friend showed extraordinary courage. Delivering alone and caring for her child in these conditions required strength most people never need to find. Be proud of her, and proud of yourselves for helping one older woman." Maria stepped forward. "Will they punish us for knowing and not reporting?" "No," Sarah said. "Captain Morrison understands that you were helping a prisoner in need. That is not a punishable act. It is human decency." The women visibly relaxed. Several gently touched Marguerite, murmuring blessings in German. Watching these small acts, Sarah felt a shift in her own understanding. These weren't just prisoners. They were mothers, daughters, sisters, and friends. Women swept up in a war they never started, fighting to preserve what humanity they could over the next weeks. Sarah monitored Annalise and Marguerite closely. The baby gained weight slowly but steadily, responding well to formula and her mother's improving milk supply. Annalise's anemia eased with iron and extra food. Gradually, her fear softened, replaced by cautious hope that she might actually keep her daughter 6 weeks. After the initial report, Sarah was called to Captain Morrison's office to hear the decision. She found him reading the official correspondence, his face carefully neutral. "What did they say?" she asked. "They are letting you stay together." Annalise's eyes widened, tears spilling freely as hope and relief hit her. She asked, unable to hide the anxiety in her voice. Morrison handed her the letter. "Read it yourself." Sarah scanned the military jargon and official language, searching for the key passage. And there it was in paragraph 4. In light of the medical recommendations and extraordinary circumstances, authorization is granted to keep prisoner Annalise Becker and dependent minor Marguerite Becker together as a family through detention and repatriation processing. They approved it. Sarah breathed. "They're letting them stay together with conditions," Morrison added. "Regular medical monitoring, behavioral assessments, periodic reviews." But yes, they've agreed that separating them would cause more problems than it would solve. Tears threatened Sarah's eyes, but she blinked them back. "Thank you, sir, for supporting this, for pushing it through the right channels, for giving us a chance to handle it properly." Morrison leaned back in his chair. I've been doing this job nearly 2 years, managing prisoners, processing paperwork, following rules. It's easy to forget we are dealing with human beings, not just case files or transport lists. This reminded me why we must be better than the regime we fought against. Why details matter. The news spread quickly through the women's compound. When Sarah arrived for her routine check, she found Annalise sitting in the winter sun outside, Marguerite bundled on her chest. The mother's face, still thin and marked by hardship, now shone with something like joy. "They will let us stay together?" Annalise asked as Sarah approached. "Yes, through repatriation and back to Germany. Wherever you go, Marguerite goes with you." Annalise closed her eyes, tears streaming. "I prayed for this every night, every moment. I prayed that God would not take another child from me." Sarah sat beside her, watching the baby sleep peacefully. "Tell me about your plans when you return to Germany. I have a sister in Berlin. If she survived." "If I can find her," Annalise shrugged. "Otherwise, I will find work, find a place to live. I was a teacher before the war. Maybe I can teach again or work in a factory. Anything. It doesn't matter as long as Marguerite is with me. She needs regular medical care. Make sure you find a doctor as soon as you settle." "I will. I promise." Annalise adjusted the blanket around her daughter's face. "Nurse Mitchell, I want you to know I will tell Marguerite about you when she's older, when she can understand. I will tell her about the American nurse who saved our lives." "You saved your own lives," Sarah said gently. "I just helped make it official." But even as she said it, Sarah knew it wasn't completely true. Without her, the system would have separated them, without Captain Morrison's support, without the careful paperwork that made officials see people rather than just problems. They would have been separated. Sometimes survival needed more than personal courage. It needed institutions and people willing to bend rules, to find space for compassion inside strict military order. Repatriation came in March 1946. By then, Marguerite was 4 months old, healthier than at birth, but still small and fragile. Annalise had regained some weight, though she would never be strong. The war had taken too much from her body and spirit. Sarah accompanied them to the transport staging area, carrying Marguerite's medical records and a letter to Red Cross workers in Germany who could help Annalise find her sister and settle in. The farewell was short. Too many prisoners were being processed for long goodbyes, but it was meaningful. "Be safe," Sarah said, holding Annalise carefully, mindful of the baby between them. "Take care of each other." "We will." Annalise's English had improved greatly during captivity. "And Nurse Mitchell, thank you for seeing us, for seeing past the uniforms and camps and the war, for remembering we are human." Sarah watched them board the truck to the port, stayed until it disappeared into the distance. Around her, other prisoners said their own goodbyes. Guards handled paperwork. The machinery of demobilization moved forward. But Sarah's mind stayed on that small family, on the impossible journey ahead, on the hope that somehow, against all odds, they would survive and maybe even thrive. She never saw Annalise or Marguerite again. The chaos of post-war Europe made tracking refugees nearly impossible 2 years later. Sarah received a letter through Red Cross channels. Written in careful English on thin paper, dated July 1948, Dear Nurse Mitchell, I hope this letter finds you well. I want you to know Marguerite and I are alive and safe. We found my sister in Berlin. She survived barely. We live with her and her children in a small apartment. The city is still in ruins, but it is rebuilding, and so are we. Marguerite is 2 years old now. She is small for her age, but healthy, curious about everything, full of life. She does not remember the camp, does not remember those first terrible days. For her, life began when we came to Berlin, and I am grateful for that mercy. I am teaching again at a school for children who lost their families in the war. There are so many orphans, so much need, but teaching gives me purpose, reminds me the future exists, that the children growing up now will not repeat our mistakes. I have told Marguerite about you, though she is too young to understand, but I will keep telling her, and one day she will know that a woman she never met loved her enough to fight for her, to make sure she could stay with her mother when the rules said otherwise. I do not know if we will ever meet again in this life, but please know that you gave me back the will to live, the hope that kindness still exists in the world. That gift was more valuable than you can imagine. With deepest gratitude, Annalise Becker. Sarah kept that letter in her desk drawer for the rest of her life. She returned to civilian practice after the war, worked in a hospital in Virginia, married a doctor she met there, raised 3 children, but she never forgot the German mother who gave birth alone in a prisoner camp, who hid her newborn for 6 days out of desperate love, who fought to survive so her daughter could live. The story became part of Sarah's family lore, told to her children and grandchildren as an example of how individual choices could matter, how small acts of courage, both Annalise and her own, could ripple outward in unexpected ways. Her daughter followed her into nursing, inspired by the story of the hidden baby and the nurse who helped protect her years later. In 1968, Sarah received another letter. This one was written in perfect English, the handwriting neat and professional. Dear Mrs. Mitchell, you do not know me, but you saved my life before I was old enough to know I needed saving. My name is Marguerite Becker Huffman. My mother, Annalise, told me about you from my earliest memories, about the American nurse who made it possible for us to stay together when the rules said we should be separated. My mother passed away last year, peacefully surrounded by family. Before she died, she made me promise to find you, to thank you personally for what you did. It took me months to track down your current address, but I am a teacher like my mother, and teachers are persistent. I wanted you to know what became of the baby you helped protect. I grew up in Berlin, attended university, became a teacher of English and history. I married a good man, a doctor, and we have 2 children of our own. My life has been ordinary in the best possible way, no drama, no tragedy, just the quiet accumulation of happy days. But none of that would have happened without you. Without your willingness to see my mother as a person rather than a prisoner, to see me as a baby who needed protecting rather than a problem to be solved. You gave us the chance to be a family, and that chance became everything. My mother told me often that there were people in the war who chose cruelty and people who chose kindness, and that those choices defined who they truly were. She said, you chose kindness when it would have been easier to follow rules blindly. That choice saved 2 lives and made possible the lives that came after. My children, my students, everyone I've touched, because I was allowed to grow up. Thank you does not seem sufficient, but it is all I have to offer. Thank you for seeing us. Thank you for fighting for us. Thank you for being the kind of person who makes the world better in small, essential ways. With profound gratitude, Dr. Marguerite Hoffman. Sarah wept when she read that letter, overcome by the realization that the frightened baby she had examined in a prisoner barracks had grown into a woman with children of her own, that the life she had helped preserve had blossomed into exactly the kind of ordinary miracle the war had tried to destroy. She wrote back immediately, beginning a correspondence that would last until Sarah's death in 1983. The letters covered everything: Marguerite's teaching career, her children's accomplishments, the slow healing of post-war Germany, the persistent memories of wartime trauma, the ways history echoed through generations, and always beneath the surface topics, the unspoken acknowledgement of what had happened in that Louisiana prisoner camp in 1945, when two women from enemy nations had conspired to protect a newborn's life in 1978. Marguerite traveled to the United States for an academic conference and made the journey to Virginia to meet Sarah in person. The reunion was emotional. Two women, last seen when one was a helpless infant and the other a young nurse, now met as mature adults with decades of experience between them. They spent 3 days together talking about everything and nothing, about the past and the present, about the ways small moments could change entire lives. Marguerite brought photographs, her children, her husband, her students, her mother in later years. Sarah shared her own family photos, her memories of the war and its aftermath, her career in nursing that had been shaped by those months at Camp Ruston. On the final evening of Marguerite's visit, they sat on Sarah's porch, watching the sunset, comfortable in the silence that came with deep understanding. "Do you ever wonder?" Marguerite asked, "What would have happened if he'd followed the regulations strictly? If you'd reported my mother and me without advocating for us to stay together?" "Often," Sarah admitted. "I imagine you would have been sent to an institution. Probably your mother would have been repatriated alone. You might have been reunited eventually, or you might not have been. The chaos after the war made many things uncertain. My mother believed we would have been separated permanently, that I would have been adopted by an American family, perhaps, or placed in an orphanage in Germany. She believed that your intervention was the only thing that kept us together. Maybe. Or maybe the system would have worked correctly eventually. I'd like to think so anyway." Marguerite shook her head. "I am a historian now. In addition to being a teacher, I have read extensively about the prisoner systems, about the treatment of women and children in the camps, about the repatriation process. The regulations were clear: efficiency over individual circumstances, order over compassion. Most of the time, the system did not work correctly. Most of the time, families were separated. Children were lost in bureaucratic tangles. The machinery ground forward without regard for human cost. That's a depressing view of what we were trying to do. It is an honest view, and it makes what you did even more remarkable. You were the exception that proved the rule, the person who chose humanity over efficiency, who fought to protect two people who had no power and no voice. That choice mattered more than you know." They sat in silence, watching the light fade from the sky. Sarah thought about all the choices she'd made in her life, all the patients she treated, all the small decisions that had seemed insignificant at the time, but might have changed trajectories she would never know about. And she thought about that November morning in 1945 when she examined a young German woman and discovered a secret that demanded action. "I was just doing my job," Sarah said finally, "seeing what was in front of me and responding appropriately." "No," Marguerite replied gently. "You were doing something more than your job. You were being human in a system designed to make people forget their humanity. That is never just a job. That is a choice." Every single time the story of Anneliese and Marguerite Becker became more widely known in the 1980s, when historians began documenting the experiences of German women prisoners in American camps, several academic papers reference the case as an example of how individual military personnel sometimes acted with greater compassion than regulations required. How the prisoner system was flexible enough to allow for humane exceptions when advocates pushed hard enough. But for Sarah and Marguerite, the story was never about historical significance or academic analysis. It was about the moment when a frightened young mother was given the chance to keep her baby. When a nurse chose advocacy over blind rule following, when compassion found space within a military system not designed to accommodate it. Sarah died in 1983, surrounded by family, her life full and well lived. Marguerite attended the funeral, traveling from Germany specifically to pay her respects. She stood at the graveside and thought about the woman who saved her life before she was old enough to understand what life meant, who fought for her mother when no one else would, who demonstrated that even in the darkest times, individual choices could create light. Thank you, Marguerite whispered to the cold ground and the stone marker, for seeing us, for saving us, for reminding everyone that we were human. The wind carried her words away across the Virginia cemetery, past rows of other graves holding other stories, other lives that had been touched and changed by individual moments of courage or cruelty, compassion or indifference. And somewhere in the vast machinery of history, in the countless small decisions that shape human experience, Marguerite's gratitude joined the chorus of thanks that connects saviors and saved across time and distance and circumstance, because in the end, that's what the story was about. Not regulations or military systems or prisoner camps or even the war itself. It was about a nurse who saw a woman in need and chose to help. About a mother who loved her child enough to risk everything. About a baby who survived against impossible odds because people chose to fight for her survival. Louisiana, November 1945. A cold examination room. A frightened young mother. A hidden newborn. A nurse making a choice that would echo through decades. The war had created the circumstances, but human decisions, small, individual, courageous decisions, created the outcome. And that outcome rippled forward through Marguerite's life, and her children's lives, and the lives of everyone they touched, proving that even in the midst of systems designed for control and order, there remained space for the most essential human quality of all: the ability to see another person as suffering and choose to help regardless of the consequences, regardless of the regulations, simply because it was right. That choice, Sarah Mitchell's choice to advocate rather than simply report, to see Annalise and Marguerite as people deserving protection rather than problems requiring a solution, that choice made all the difference. And in a world that often feels shaped by vast impersonal forces, by historical inevitabilities and rigid systems, the story of the hidden baby and the nurse who saved her reminds us that individual actions still matter, that compassion still has power. One person's courage can change another person's entire life. The sun set over Camp Ruston in November 1945, casting long shadows across the compound. Inside Barracks 7, Annalise held her daughter close, no longer terrified of being discovered, no longer forced to hide the most precious thing in her life. Outside, Sarah Mitchell finished her rounds, her medical kit lighter than usual, her heart heavy with the weight of what she had witnessed and what she had helped protect. Neither woman knew how the story would end. Neither could predict the decades ahead, the lives that would be built, the gratitude that would be expressed across time and distance. They knew only what existed in that moment: a mother and child who would not be separated, a future that remained possible, a small victory for humanity in a world that had tried very hard to crush it. And sometimes that small victory is enough. Sometimes the story of one nurse, one mother, and one hidden baby is the story that needs to be told. Not because it represents every experience, but because it represents the possibility that lived within every experience. The possibility that even in the worst circumstances, even inside systems built for control rather than care, there remained the chance for human kindness, for individual courage, for the simple act of seeing someone suffering and choosing to help. That possibility, fragile, precious, essential, is what Sarah Mitchell protected when she chose to advocate for Annalise and Marguerite. And that possibility is what Marguerite honored when she grew into a woman who taught others about history, about humanity, about the small choices that create big consequences. The story lives on, passed through families, recorded in historical documents, serving as a reminder that individual actions matter, that compassion has power, that even the smallest life is worth fighting for. And in a world that often feels ruled by forces beyond personal control, that reminder carries weight beyond its simple story. Louisiana, November 1945. A nurse, a mother, a hidden baby, a choice, a consequence, a life saved. And from that moment, ripples spread outward through time, touching lives that would never know the source of their own existence. proving that history is not only shaped by great leaders and vast armies, but by ordinary people making extraordinary choices in moments that seem small, but turn out to be everything.